All right, so picture the brutal, deadlocked trenches of World War I. You know the scene. Well, in the middle of all that, one nation decided to forge a whole new kind of soldier. This wasn't just another infantryman. This was a weapon designed to completely shatter the stalemate. Today, we're diving into the story of the Arditi, Italy's legendary shock troops.
So, meet the Arditi. And that name, it comes from the Italian verb ardire, which literally means to dare. So yeah, these guys were the daring ones. And just look at them, wielding daggers, absolutely brimming with confidence. They were an elite special force, and you better believe they were a sight to behold.
And hey, this wasn't just some Italian propaganda, you know? This is literally how their enemies described them. The armies of the Central Powers called them the most feared. And a reputation like that, it isn't just handed to you. No way. It was earned in all that fire and mud on the Italian front. One absolutely terrifying trench raid at a time.
All right, so the big question is, why? Why create a force like this? Well, to answer that, we really have to get our heads around the problem they were designed to solve. That horrific, grinding stalemate of the First World War.
You see, on the Italian front, just like the Western front, the war had just bogged down. It was a complete nightmare of trench warfare. I mean, armies were throwing hundreds of thousands of men against barbed wire and machine guns. And for what? A few yards of territory? The human cost was just unthinkable. It was clear the old ways of fighting were failing, and I mean catastrophically.
So you had these forward-thinking officers, right? Guys like Major General Francesco Grazioli, and they realized that just throwing more men at the problem was a bloody dead end. They needed something new, a new tactic, a new type of soldier. And the idea was this. What if instead of this massive human wave, you took a small, super elite force and used them like a spear tip to just punch a hole right through the enemy's weakest point? That, right there, is the whole concept of shock troops. Now, to be fair, the idea of having special units wasn't totally new. Italy already had these armored sappers, and get this, they were called the Companies of Death. Their job was basically to go out in heavy armor and cut barbed wire. But the Arditi, they were something else entirely. They were fundamentally different. This wasn't about slow, careful engineering work. Nope. This was all about pure speed, aggression, and breaking right through the enemy line. So how does an idea like that actually become a reality on the battlefield? Let's get into the nitty-gritty. We're going to look at how these daring ones were actually created, what they were armed with, and how they were finally unleashed. And you know how militaries can be, right? Things usually move at a snail's pace. But this process, it moved remarkably fast. Grazioli's idea from 1916 really started to gain traction, and by June of 1917, the High Command gave it the green light. And then, just 1 month later, bam. Under officers like Colonel Bassi, the very first assault battalion was officially formed. The Arditi were officially born. Okay, let's talk about their gear, because an Ardito's loadout was basically a close-quarters nightmare for anyone on the receiving end. First off, forget the long, clumsy rifle of a regular soldier. They carried a lighter carbine, sure, but their real tools, a dagger for silent, deadly work, and a jacket just stuffed to the gills with hand grenades. And as if that wasn't enough, they also brought specialized firepower like machine pistols and even flamethrowers to clear out trenches with, let's be honest, just brutal, terrifying efficiency. And their motto? Wow. It just perfectly captures their whole mentality. O la vittoria o tutti accoppati. It means we either win or we all die. And listen, this wasn't just some catchy phrase they put on a banner. It was a commitment. The Arditi attacked with a ferocity that left absolutely no room for retreat, no room for surrender. It was victory or total annihilation. And that philosophy, well, it's what made them so incredibly effective and so incredibly feared. So their first major test comes in August 1917. They get thrown into the 11th Battle of the Isonzo, and the results were, well, they were stunning. They crossed the river, they stormed enemy towns, they seized key objectives that had held out against attack after attack. They even captured the heavily fortified Mount San Gabriel. Now, they did end up having to pull back because they'd basically outrun their own reinforcements and supplies, but the crucial point had been made. This whole shock troop concept, it absolutely worked.
But here's the thing. Their most legendary moment, it wasn't going to come from a great victory. Oh no. It would come during the Italian army's absolute darkest hour, the catastrophic, soul-crushing defeat at the Battle of Caporetto.
So, it's late October 1917. A surprise German and Austro-Hungarian offensive just utterly shatters the Italian front line. And what followed wasn't really a battle, it was a complete collapse. The entire Italian Second Army just disintegrated. We're talking hundreds of thousands of soldiers in a chaotic, panicked retreat. The entire nation was on the brink of disaster.
And in the middle of all that chaos, someone had to hold the line. Someone had to stand and fight, the Arditi. They'd actually been in their training camps when the attack started, but they were rushed to the front immediately. And their mission, it completely changed. They were no longer the tip of the spear. Now they had to become a living shield. Their job was to fight these desperate, basically suicidal rearguard actions, all to buy a little more time for the rest of the army to escape. And the story of the 1st Assault Battalion, it's just legendary. After fighting to slow the enemy advance, they found themselves completely surrounded in the city of Udine. So what do? They fall back to the city's ancient castle, and they refuse to surrender. They fought and fought until every last round of ammunition was gone. It was a final, defiant stand to save as many of their comrades and civilians as they possibly could. And the sacrifice, it was almost total. Of all the men from that 1st Battalion who were trapped at Udine, it's estimated that around 360 were killed. Only about 70 were taken prisoner. They were practically wiped out to the last man. But that stand, it became this powerful symbol of courage right in the middle of a national disaster.
But that's not the end of the story, not by a long shot. Because the Arditi were actually reborn from the ashes of Caporetto, and they would go on to leave a very complicated and very lasting mark on history. So the Italian army somehow managed to stabilize its lines, and the Arditi were rebuilt. And in January 1918, they were the ones who spearheaded a successful counterattack, the Battle of the Three Mountains. Now, militarily, this victory was important, for sure. But its real value, it was psychological. It was this huge morale boost. It proved to Italy and to the whole world that the Italian soldier was not broken. Now, after the war, this is where their legacy gets really complicated. It kind of splits in two. On one hand, you have the military innovators. Their battlefield tactics were absolutely revolutionary, and they went on to influence special forces for generations. In fact, today, Italy's elite 9th Paratroopers Assault Regiment are considered their direct heirs. But there's another side to this coin. Their powerful symbolism, the black shirts, the swagger, that dagger, it was all co-opted by post-war political movements. First by nationalist militias, and then, most famously, by Benito Mussolini's fascist black shirts. So, where does that leave us? What's the takeaway here? Were they incredible battlefield innovators who changed modern warfare? Were they national heroes who sacrificed everything at Caporetto? Or were they a symbol, an aesthetic that was twisted to serve a much darker political ideology? The truth, as it so often is complicated. It's probably a mix of all three, leaving us with a legacy that is every bit as daring and just as controversial as the men themselves.